myself, welcome. So I think most of you probably have met me before. My name's James McIntosh. I'm the Managing Director for Cogent Skills Apprenticeships, and I'll let Lisa, who's joined us, introduce herself as well.
Hi, yeah, thanks, James, and good morning, everyone. I'm Lisa Andrews, and I'm the Deputy Managing Director for SIAS. And for most of you, I think we've worked with you already with regards to endpoint assessment. So lovely to see you all this morning. Thanks, James.
Lisa. That's great. So thank you for joining us, everybody. We really want to get into the detail around the upcoming apprenticeship or ongoing apprenticeship assessment reforms. So we've got some information to go through, some slides from myself. The key for you guys today is obviously how it affects you as employers and how it affects your apprentices moving forward as well. So I'll just share the slide deck. Should be able to see now, hopefully. So on the agenda for today, we're going to look at why are things changing, what the reforms will look like and do look like, because they are now in process, some timelines and phases around the reforms themselves, then some real detail around the assessment plans. So obviously that'll give us a bit of an indication around what it will look like for your apprentices moving forward. And then there is a slide around that in particular. And then I'm going to hand over to Lisa to talk about the assessment organisation piece, how a SIAS dealing with this. Obviously, they're a key partner of ours. We use them for EPA across pretty much all of our apprenticeship standards as well. And there's some real good information that Lisa will share with you guys about how that will work at assessment for your apprentices. And then plenty of time for questions and answers as well. So lots for us to get through in a relatively short period of time. So we'll get into the information. So just around what we're going to cover today, for those of you, obviously you all know us because you work with us very closely already, but just where we're at in terms of our provision. So we operate mainly in the process manufacturing space. So all these reforms affect all these standards. So the three process-based ones we offer, plus lab technician. We do offer the science industry maintenance technician. That's retired now, so that's not affected by the reform. But the new version of that, which is the engineering maintenance technician, will be. So there will be some resultant reforms around that. And a process leader as well, our level 4 standard. So all the apprenticeships that we offer are in scope for these reforms as well. So what does it actually mean? So effectively, I always like to start with a bit of context, I suppose. So these announcements were made sort of February last year. And we were sort of told, really, it's all about, from the government and Skills England's perspective, and the DfE's perspective, it's about simplifying the system and getting that pathway from education into employment quicker, because it was felt that across the board, and there probably will be some very specific examples of this, but across the board, Skills England felt that there were hold-ups, there were barriers, there were challenges around endpoint, around assessment, around that journey of once somebody hits occupational competence, getting them through the process to actually then be deemed as a time-served apprentice and finish their apprenticeship. I think the reality is that we believe it's really designed to remove costs from the current system. So, that was the goal, was to, hopefully retain some costs, whether it's into the Treasury or back into Skills England to spend somewhere else. In reality, and you'll see in one of our slides later, it's just moving cost around. There's not a lot of saving of cost. Yes, there'll be some changes in terms of what assessment organisations will charge providers, but then also more costs from providers to be able to do what we need to do as part of this anyway. There is a little quote there that I put in from Skills England, which is, the reforms are about making apprenticeships more agile, employer-led and responsive to industry needs. But I think that's a really interesting one, because I feel personally, and maybe this is because I look at things through the Cogent lens quite often, that our programs already are quite agile and we work really closely with our employers. And I think some of that shows from you being on the call today. The responsive to industry needs part for me is interesting, because I don't think, I could be wrong, it's maybe one for the Q&A, that many of you will have been consulted by Skills England as part of this process. And that's the key to me, is that we speak to Skills England, we're speaking to DfE around the consultations around these programs, but I think that they haven't really consulted with employers as part of this program, which sort of leads me to believe that's a that's a gap for them as well. Of course, they do want to increase completion and achievement rates. It looks very good on a manifesto if they're looking to say, you know, we came in, we got hold of the skills system, look at what we did, you know, 3 years down the line, we managed to take apprenticeships from 60% to 70%. That's a really good story for them. So again, simplifying the assessment process will do that, because it will allow some of those probably simpler standards to get through quicker as well. And one of their real goals, and you probably would have heard a lot of this narrative, is a lot of the talk now has shifted from apprenticeships in general into getting more young people and NEETs into apprenticeships. So obviously the sort of landscape for apprenticeships, and many of you will have utilised this, is using a levy for level 7 apprenticeships, for degree level apprenticeships, and to upskill existing staff, which are all things that you were able to do because that's what the system allowed you to do. And they've gradually taken some of those things away. So level 7 has gone, level 6 has been cut, and there's some sort of defunding around that potentially in the future as well. Because the drive from Skills England is they've got this neat problem of, I think, over 1 million people between 16 to 18 are in this category now, and they want to drive that into more apprenticeships and foundation apprenticeships and those sorts of things. So that's a bit of the context in terms of, you know, what the landscape looks like. So what will the changes look like? This for me is where we get into the real detail. I'll cover these off sort of one by one. There's sort of no priority, I guess, but there is no particular order for this. But one of the real key ones is it will no longer be end point assessment. So that's a phrase we've all become familiar with over the last 9 years since the standards were originally brought in, away from the old framework system. And really, it's going to be what's called on-program assessment now. So if you look at where we were in 2016 in terms of the old framework potential NVQ system, that was on program assessment, and then we swung a full to the other way to be this new EPA model. We're sort of swinging halfway back now in a way, into it's going to be on program assessment. So it will no longer all be at the end, but some could be, and I'm sure Lisa will cover that in more detail when she goes through some of her slides as well. The knowledge is with the assessment organisation. So what at the moment, as you know, the knowledge, skills and behaviours are all assessed by SIAS for us, our endpoint assessment organisation. So we basically work with you guys, prepare the learners through to endpoint, through to gateway, pass them to SIAS, and they do the rest. That's changing. So the knowledge at the moment will retain with the AO, so that's with SIAS. The skills will be able to be assessed by the provider. And again, Lisa will cover that in more detail on different options, but there is an option now that skills, so ourselves as Cogent, we can assess the skills as part of the overall assessment. Now we do that now. So you'll see now our assessors come into your workplace, they talk to your employers, they talk to your mentors, talk to the apprentices, they do the reviews. So we're already doing on-program skills assessment. We'll just be able to do the final overall assessment if required. Every standard, will have a new assessment plan written for it. So what it's not is a rewrite of the actual standard itself. So the knowledge and skills elements, so you probably would have been part of some of these trailblazer groups that have been consulting employers on when a new standard is up for review or a new standard comes to market. This is not a whole rewrite of every standard. It's just the assessment plan that we're looking at here in terms of for each standard as well. The positive news, or we feel it's positive news from us as a provider, this doesn't affect your current learners that are on current programs. You know, we're making a commitment that it'll be new starts only, and there's a bit more about timelines and process as part of the conversation. But it won't be a case with our apprentices that we'll be switching learners that are on programs. Some standards, yes, some standards, no. We'll have some nice clear time frames and phase in, phase out of various standards when they come into scope to be renewed. This was not relevant to our apprentices, but for those apprentices that you have got, they've got mandated qualifications, they will probably be impacted the most initially, because there are some standards that have got mandated quals where that qualification has become the assessment. An example of that is a finance accountant standard. It's obviously not one that we do. There's an AAT qual as part of that standard. And when it got into review, the panel decided the qual itself would be enough to deem occupational competency and have complete coverage of those K and S criteria. Now, that's not the case for some of the more technical standards, which is a real positive one. Again, Lisa might touch on this as well. So things like metal fabricator, NJOPS, a level 2 standard, there is now a conversation around actually, whilst there is a mandated qual in the standard, there's still a requirement for some form of assessment in addition to that. So that's another thing. One shift that you will see as an employer is that behaviours, at the moment, the B criteria in the standards is currently assessed by SIAS at the end. That will now be verified by you as the employer. So that process at the moment hasn't been, I don't think, 100% outlined. We're still in the process of finding out what it looks like. But I would imagine it'll be very similar to like a declaration from the mentor and then the lead employer to say, we believe that the apprentice is regularly showing these sort of behaviours as part of their work, and then you sign that basically. So it's a verification rather than an assessment. So there's key language there that's changing as well. One of the real positives is that there's no funding reduction as part of reform. Real concern of mine was that they would use this as an opportunity to really slash the funding on apprenticeships. And obviously we've already got a higher cost base coming in, so that would be a real risk, I think, to some providers in the sector. But we've been guaranteed there's no funding reduction as part of assessment reform, which is great for us. And it's also designed to remove duplication of assessment. So at the moment, there is a feeling on some standards that Ks and Ss are sometimes assessed separately by some AOs and some providers. Therefore, the new world combines them in assessment. So you'll see in some of the newer standards that duties are listed, and there's a combined Ks and Ss involved in that. The new assessment plans that are coming out have a similar sort of feel to them. They're combining some of those Ks and Ss. So the jobs that the apprentices do cover off some of that assessment rather than just doing it individually one by one. Timelines, I think, are really important as well. So here's the journey we've been on so far. I won't go through all those things there. You can see it for yourself. But what you will see is it's already been nearly 16, 17 months since the reforms got sort of announced, I suppose. The real key ones for me is from January this year. So in January this year, one of our standards, which you'll see on the next slide, SMPO, so Science Manufacturing Process Operative, level 2 standard. So many of you may not engage with that one in particular, was one of the first ones in the first round of standards that was announced. And we were asked to join what's called a group of persons, which is a strange phrase in my opinion, but that's effectively a trailblazer group from Skills England. And that's supposed to be providers, employers, assessment organisations, professional bodies round the table to really look at the assessment plan. We were asked to join that group. Then the assessment plan within a couple of months is there to be approved. And then you look at the next part, which is it's taken a while for us, is that we still haven't got the SMPO finalised yet. And that process started in January. So that's 5 months so far in. So realistically, you're probably talking from the group of persons sitting to then getting to a point where you can register new starters on the plan, at least a 9-month timeline. So from the next slide I'll show you in a second, you'll see that actually a lot of these things are still a long way off. So there'll be no immediate impact for you as employers because it's not going to affect your current learners on programme anyway. I think confidently, relatively confidently, our September intake, which is always our largest intake, will probably surpass these timelines anyway. So I don't think there'll be a concern for September. It'll be post then, when I think some of our standards will come into scope there. And that sort of process there is the one you can see. So standard gets announced for reform. That's all public information, so that you can go on the Skills England website and look for the standards that you guys recruit. Then a group of persons is formed, the new assessment plan is developed, and the consultation starts. When the consultation is open, you as an employer can feed back in. So if you've not been invited to the group of persons, you can still give feedback when the consultation opens. Once that's finished, then the new assessment plan is approved and then published. Then it goes to the assessment organisations. So SIAS then pick it up and develop their assessment strategy around it, because that can be flexible from organisation to organisation. And once all that is complete, then it becomes live for providers to register new stats on the new programme with the new assessment plan. So it's a long time to get to that process. And I am seeing things at the moment sort of slow down a little bit as well, which I can show you on this slide here. So these are some of our headline ones that we've already spoke about. So SMPO was the first one through the door. I was envisaging originally it'd be live by now, and it's not, still not. So we're sort of awaiting that new assessment plan process. And then obviously SIAS will be able to do their piece of work around that as well. So the process leader was announced in phase 2, which was supposed to be starting sort of spring 2026. We haven't been asked to go on the group of persons yet, but we are in dialogue with Skills England, so we know it hasn't sat yet. So again, that's probably lagging in timeline already. Lab Tech currently in review, but nothing started on that yet. So there's no announcement around when that first group of persons will sit. So again, we're talking about quite a significant time scale away. The PIMT, which is obviously the replacement for the old SMT, Science Manufacturing Technician, your process operative standard. Nothing yet, no announcement yet. But we are expecting to hear in the next few months that one will be next up. And the same for the new engineering maintenance technician. No announcement yet on that one either. And it's a fairly new standard that only came out last year. So you'd imagine that the assessment plan could be tweaked quite easily around that. So around the assessment plan itself, one that we do know because we've got a draft of it. So whilst I can't share the full assessment plan with you, I can certainly share some of the information that was on it. It does sort of give us a little bit of insight into what it might look like. And some of the positives for us as a provider, and I'm sure for SIAS as an AO, it's not radically different. You know, although we're talking about some of these things being a shift, the actual assessment itself is not hugely different. And those are the sort of key takeaways in orange there. Behaviours we talked about, not registered on the plan because they're not going to be done. They're not going to be assessed anymore. They'll be verified, so they're not listed at all. There is that consolidated knowledge and skills grouping that we talked about, where you can tick off criteria on programme at various windows and then consolidate together. That flexible assessment timing, so there's no reference to gateway at all in the new assessment plan. That perhaps Melissa can give us some more information on as part of her conversation. In this one, bearing in mind that they all won't be the same because you know they are all different now. But in the SMPO, the observation is mandatory. That's obviously the on-site practical part. And there is an optional portfolio. That's where the flexibility can come in because SIAS, as an assessment organisation, can say our assessment strategy will include a competence evaluation log or a portfolio like it does now. So that's for the AO to do. And I think from what I can read from the assessment plan, it does give more responsibility to the assessment organisation to basically map out their assessment design, how they want to do it, or how they best feel is suitable for that standard as well. And just the impact on employers and learners. So I think what you will see, and this is not a reflection on ourselves on SIAS, I think this is across the piece in generic apprenticeship reforms. You'll see some fewer delays around gateway EPA because that won't exist. So that sort of EPA window, the endpoint assessment, will be done throughout the programme. So it should create a more of a smooth transition across the learner journey, which may lead to some learners completing quicker. You know, some of our standards, process leader, for example, has a 5-month EPA window. It doesn't take 5 months to get through this. It's a really big window, that. So I think, you know, removing some of those barriers, you will see some learners possibly completing quicker if they're going through the work at a reasonable rate. In terms of impact, again, I don't think you'll see a huge shift from us because I do believe, and I'm happy to be challenged on this, that the on-programme assessment part, the assessors that visit you in company, is a strength of ours. It's one of the things that I would put a lot of faith in our guys and the relationships they've got with some of our customers as well, that we do a good job of that. But you will see closer working with providers as well as part of this, because that whole verification of behaviours piece, ensuring that the learners are hitting those windows of assessment along the line, will require some comms and some closer working with providers and AOs as well, of course. The one thing you will see is this different standards transitioning at different times. So, you're sort of seeing there, there'll be a raft that will probably be being done with the SMPO, because there was about 90 standards announced in that first area back last year. They'll be coming to the market sort of between now and the next 6 months, so they'll be first. And then depending on what you do wider, because I know some of you use lots of different apprenticeships across all different areas, you'll be able to then see which ones are coming on stream, which ones are new starts, and sort of, I guess, phase some of those out. So there will be a little state of various things happening at various times that you'll have to manage as employers, depending on what providers you use, of course. Then it's the last slide for myself, just about reaction, really. I suppose what we've seen from the market, from the industry, there was definitely initially an industry pushback, and that was some providers obviously saying that we don't believe. I genuinely didn't believe that the system was broken, so I didn't think it required fixing. But again, I'm looking at things on the 4 or 5 standards we offer and the great relationship we have with SIAS in terms of VPA. So that you may argue that wider, there's probably some potential horror stories around how EPA was being done on various other standards. So I do understand that from an industry point of view. There's a big pushback on the mandatory qual piece, which has seen some reaction. So that's what, when you talk about that needing some form of assessment still around complete coverage of qualification. The construction industry was announced. I think they had quite a large amount of standards in the first raft of standards going through. There's a big pushback in terms of they didn't accept that the mandatory qual would be the endpoint assessment for their apprentices on site. So that sort of led for from a number of other industries then responding. So we, as a life sciences sort of sector skills council, the Chemical Industry Association, the Nuclear Skills Alliance, there are a number of what you'd call technical based industries pushed back into Skills England and said you can't take a one view approach across all industries. So that accountancy example I gave you probably is correct, in terms of if that qual does have the coverage, of course it can be enough for the assessment. But for our standards, you look at some of the engineering ones, some of the other ones that have got mandatory quals, it wouldn't be good enough. I'm sure you wouldn't be happy if all your learners have done is knowledge training, and then you're effectively saying that they're fine to do the job. The competency side, I think, is the most important part. So there's been a lot of pushback there from a lot of industries and providers as well at the same time. Alongside that, you will be seeing or feeling, if you're using the standards, the leadership and management cuts. So team leader level 3, ops manager level 4, both going. So as of September, you won't be able to utilize those standards anymore. I would also obviously say that at this point, you should use process leader for that. Level 4 process leader, great standard to use for those team leaders, shift leaders in manufacturing. So talk to us about that as a replacement for those 2 standards as well. And that's that swing around I was talking about, trying to recover some costs into the system as well. Those are 2 very big standards widely used across all industries that are gone. An apprenticeship unit is the new thing that came out, allowing you to flexibly use your levy on certain courses. Hasn't landed as well as I think they thought it would in terms of the content. Some of these things are really difficult in terms of the amount of hours, and the funding's not very good. So there's a lot of sort of pushback on that at the moment as well. And the reality that now we're in this stage now, it's happening. So initially the first pushback to Skills England was don't change it, don't do it, doesn't need to happen. But it is. So we're really focusing on how we can adapt with that. Sessions like today to give you information, sort of ease you into the concept, and we'll continue to do these as we learn more information as well, to work with you and your learners as well. And the final thing for us obviously is our strong relationship with SIAS is key to this. I think you'll find some providers that don't have that relationship with their assessment organisation will struggle, but luckily we've got a great partnership, and it's something that I really value. So at that point I'm going to hand over to Lisa to cover off from a SIAS perspective.
Super, thanks, James. Okay, so just to start, I mean, it's great that I sort of chatted with James earlier today, and like I said at the start, I think for most people on the call, we work with you already. I guess just to recap that we are a STEM specialist awarding organisation and apprenticeship assessment organisation, and what's really important, I think, as part of all of this change is that we are both of those things. So we are an awarding organisation, which means that when I get into the detail in a moment and I talk a little bit around what our delivery model will be moving forward, it does mean that we can do some of the things that James has just talked around having some of that assessment going back into providers, because we can run what we call a centre model because we are an awarding organisation. What you may find in the sector is that some current endpoint assessment organisations at the moment are only endpoint assessment organisations, which doesn't mean that they've got that flexibility maybe to be able to do some of the things that we're going to talk about. I guess just sort of from a high level perspective point of view, I mean, James has just shared there, you know, the standards that are particular with regards to the Cogent portfolio, and the standards that obviously are going to be particularly impacted with you from a Cogent delivery perspective point of view. But we currently have 36 standards in our portfolio that at some point between now and August, so Skills England's timeline is saying that they want all standards in review by August. That's quite a lot, obviously, for us to be able to monitor and keep on track with. And at the moment, from December's review, we've actually got 16 standards at the moment that are at some point along that review process. And as James has said, we've got the SMPO, the process leader, and the lab tech at the moment that are currently at some point along that timeline. And timelines continue to move out. I think that's where we're at the moment. I think my own personal view is that I think by August, Skills England may be able to say that all standards are in review, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the actual groups of persons and the actual, you know, sort of review has actually started and taken place. I think that's going to take a bit of time, and I think, you know, we can see that already, you know, with regards to those standards that came in review in February. And we still haven't got that first kick-off meeting for the groups of persons. So again, you know, it's happening, but it's not going to happen overnight. You know, there's the timelines, I think, are going to continue to sort of move forward. I think just to pick up on one of the things that James talked about there around, you know, what do the changes look like? And James, you know, you gave a really good overview around some of those significant changes. But I think for us, when we look at what Skills England wanted to do when they talked about the principle-based approach to apprenticeship assessment and reforms, it was very much around having awarding organisations like us having more ability to shape those assessment strategies. And that's where we really see the value here, in that we know that currently some of the assessment plans can be challenging. You know, James gave a really good example there around a 5-month, you know, a 5-month EPA window. We've always been a little bit restricted in the sense that we can only deliver assessment in line with that assessment plan, and we know that there are challenges in there. So we see this as a real opportunity that we can start to develop assessment strategies that are really, really fit for purpose, that are right for industry, that are going to provide that flexibility and support. So, you know, we can allow apprentices to progress timely, and that we can, you know, and that we see it as an opportunity to engage with yourself as employers, and obviously, you know, with James and Cogent as the provider, so that we can do things better and really start to make a positive change. And that's, you know, that's certainly the way in which we've viewed this sort of moving forward. So we've really focused on making sure that our assessment model is flexible in delivery while still protecting the integrity of the assessment plan and the standard, and that's really important moving forward. And we recognise that one size doesn't fit all. The centres, you know, across our portfolio will certainly have different capacities, different ways of working. We know that different standards can have different demands on assessments as well. So we've built an approach that can really flex into that reality. After speaking initially to some employers and providers when we started to put this together, we've developed a dual assessment approach, which obviously you can see here on the slide now, that gives two very, very clear routes and two clear options. So we've got our SIAS Flex model, which is going to be very much provider-led assessment, and then our SIAS Core model, which is pretty much the way in which we're doing things at the moment, where SIAS will do the bulk of the assessment across. And I think what we will see is we'll see a little bit of a mixed economy. And I think already, you know, with some earlier conversations with James, I think across, you know, the current Cogent portfolio, we'll see both of these being delivered across various standards. And James might want to sort of chip in at the end a little bit around that and what that might look like. But if I just talk a little bit more around these two models and try to contextualize it a little bit for you. So SIAS Flex is very much aligned to the new apprenticeship assessment principles, with the model being that we have providers that are come on board as SIAS as an approved centre, which Cogent already are, and that we assess defined parts of the standard with still an element of independent assessment, and that's important. So if you've got any visibility of any new apprenticeship plans that are out there, you'll see that there is an element that we still do need to retain and do, and Ofqual are sort of indicative of that's around about sort of 40 to 50% of the standard. But the remainder of it, we can flex it, and actually the provider can do that on programme and can do the assessment on our behalf. Really important that then that's supported by external quality assurance using a risk-based sampling approach. And I'll talk a little bit more around quality assurance in a moment. SIAS Core then, as I've said, is a little bit closer to the traditional model that you're all very familiar with at the moment. We will support that independent assessment through our expert assessor pool with structured planning and coordination to make sure that you've got that seamless experience for apprentices coming in for assessment. But as James has said, the assessment won't be at the end. It will be on programme throughout the course of the apprenticeship. And when that assessment takes place will be indicative of what's agreed when we put that assessment strategy together. And I'll talk a little bit around how we're going to do that, and most importantly, how you can hopefully help us in putting that assessment strategy together. It is important to note that across the two assessment methods, the standard remains the same. James, could you just move on to the next slide for me, please? Thanks. So the standard stays the same. That's really important when we deliver across both those options. James has already talked before on an earlier slide around it's likely that the element of independent assessment that we retain is likely to be the knowledge element, but providers can choose different options for different standards dependent upon their capability. So we may see this mixed approach moving forward. As we said, Cogent are already a SIAS approved centre, so they're already set up to deliver both models, which is great. And then we move into what the assessment strategies will look like. And like I've said, this is where we see the real opportunity. We'll be able to develop assessment strategies that are really unique, that will allow us to use different assessment methods where we can remove that duplication and we can make sure that they're really accessible and fit for purpose. So if we talk a little bit more around the quality assurance model, because this is really important when we are talking around a dual model, and I guess this is an area where you may have some questions around standardization across both models and comparability of what that delivery will look like. So it all starts with the assessment model and the assessment instruments themselves. And this is agreed up front as part of that overall assessment strategy. We do need to align to the assessment plan. We need to ensure that the mandatory element of assessment forms part of our assessment strategy. But then we do have a little bit of flexibility then to be able to look at different assessment methods that are the right assessment methods that are fit for purpose to assess those knowledge, skills and behaviours. And we will be responsible for looking at the grading criteria against those learning outcomes as well. And this is what we then set out in terms of what is assessed, what type of evidence we want to be able to access and what is acceptable, how they will be marked, and most importantly, how we are going to quality assure them to make sure that we do that in the right way and that everyone then is supported through having detailed guidance materials that we will provide. So in terms of the differences,
Oh, you've muted yourself, Lisa.
Sorry, James. Just to remember that the difference isn't in the standard itself. The difference is actually within the delivery route. So if we look at SciAS Flex, as we've said, this will be a centre model. So Cogent would assess those agreed components, really utilising our tools and our criteria, and with a wraparound of that external quality assurance. And then in the SciAS core model, we provide the assessment through our assessment network. But just to reiterate that the requirements of the outcomes expected are the same. So for SciAS Flex, where the centre marks the assessments internally, those components will be supported by detailed marking criteria, minimum performance requirements, and standardised templates as well. So the same across both of those delivery models. So assessors are really marking those decisions using the same structure. We will benchmark as well, and we will apply that external quality assurance wraparound throughout both of those models through what we call a risk-based sampling model that would include things such as reviewing IQA processes, looking at assessment records, looking at learners' work, and to really confirm that those decisions are secure. It's also important to note that any SciAS approved centre that can deliver, in particular the SciAS Flex model, goes through a very rigorous approval process at the start. And this is where we will check that centres have got the right infrastructure in place, that they've got the right qualified staff, that they've got effective internal quality assurance systems in place. And obviously, it's great that we know that Cogent have already got all of those things as they are an approved centre. As the SciAS Flex model is provider-led, we will also run then standardisation sessions for assessors and IQAs to make sure that we keep the interpretation of the criteria aligned and to support that consistent judgment making as well. And that's going to be really important when we're doing that comparability across both of those models. For SciAS Core then, consistencies are built through our assessor network and that structured planning, as we've just talked about. The learner experience will be well managed and decisions made to ensure that the same standard is met across those assessments. Obviously, at this moment in time, we don't know at what point the assessments would take place on programme. That might be a question that people are thinking about. Those decisions will be made when we start to create the assessment strategy. And again, I'll talk a little bit around that in a moment. It's really important that across everything that we do, what underpins all of this is our robust lifecycle management process. So all updates in terms of guidance templates are controlled. They're all managed really carefully, and they're all implemented consistently as well. So I guess the key takeaways is that the standard is the same. Okay, so we're going to be assessing the same thing across both of those models. We're setting the same expectations, the same pass rates. Just those two different delivery models is what's sort of standing them apart. James, if you could just move on to the next slide, please. So what we're going to start to be doing quite soon, and as James has said, you know, the Science Manufacturing Process Operative Standard is the one that we would have thought by now would have been live. It has been through the consultation process. I think every day at the moment we're on Skills England and we're just checking for the announcement that particular standard is there and live for us all to see. What we'll do at that point then is we will start to have a look at defining the assessment strategy requirements. So we're going to be really clear up front on what the standard needs from an assessment perspective point of view, and based on the parameters that are set by Skills England within the Apprenticeship Assessment Plan. And this is vitally important that we co-develop this strategy with industry. So, you know, working with the likes of Cogent and working with the likes of yourselves to come in and support us as we start to put together a working group across our standards, is where we're going to ask for support moving forward. We don't want to be able to design these assessment strategies in isolation. We want everyone to be involved. You know, James, you talked a little bit earlier around that not everybody's had the opportunity to be involved in the group of persons, you know, when developing the new apprenticeship plans. But this is a real opportunity for us to be able to engage with our partners and with you as employers, and really get your input into that assessment strategy so that we can make sure that it really is fit for purpose, and that it's going to be right for the sector moving forward and for the competence of your apprentices sort of longer term. So the point at which the assessment plan goes live, James has already talked a little bit around timeframes, but for us, we've got 6 months then to develop the assessment strategy, to develop all of our assessment materials, to develop all of our resources, to make sure that we are then operationally ready at the end of that 6-month period. Okay, so that we at that point then can start to take new registrations. It's at that point then that the current assessment plan as it is now will have a retirement date that will go on to Skills England, and the new assessment plan then will kick in at that point. It is important for us, obviously, across that 6-month period that we're going to have very structured timelines, but we do need to be flexible with regards to consideration of the different workplaces that people are working in, and making sure that we're looking at different solutions when we're coming to selecting those particular assessment methods. And making sure that then the assessment strategy is working flexibly but also consistent across the requirements of the assessment plan. I think the other thing then, just to talk through just quickly, and then I will pass it back to you, James, for some further questions, is that once we put the strategies in place, what we will then look to do then is work really closely with Cogent and with our other providers to have a look at then whether or not delivery is down the core route or down the flex route. We will then go into contracting. We can then start to have a look at fees and models and what that will look like. But most importantly, then we can look at support, and that's what's going to be really key throughout this transition. It's about making sure that we are upfront with communications, that we're working in complete partnership with James, making sure that we are putting things in place in plenty of time, and that everyone is really aligned with regards to what that delivery model looks like. The other thing that's really important is, and James again has mentioned this around, you know, for current learners on programme, they're not going to be impacted. You know, Cogent have already confirmed that. So for us, what's really important is that consistency in assessment at the moment, that BAU remains as normal. You know, through the transition, we are ensuring that the delivery of those assessments are consistent, that they continue to be at the same high quality that you would expect from us at SciAS. And that there's no change throughout that transition period. You know, for some of the standards that are, you know, what we're classing as are on teach out, we've still got a pipeline of active learners for the next sort of 2-3 years, and that's really important that we maintain that level of delivery, that level of partnership, that those apprentices continue to get the best experience, that we get the best out of them on the day of assessment. But then also alongside that we are, you know, that we are working through the transition plan as well, and obviously supporting yourselves and Cogent throughout that. So James, I guess back over to you, I guess, for close out on any questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Lisa. So we've got a bit of time now. If anyone's got any particular questions, either in the Q&A or in the chat, or feel free just to put your hand up and ask a question. I got a lot of information there. It's given you hopefully a really good oversight into where we're at the moment, and the changes that are coming. So I'm going to open the floor to any questions or comments or concerns. Nobody. Okay. was expecting a few questions. Either means we've given you a really good amount of information, or you're already confused and don't know what to do with it. So, okay, if there's no questions, then happy to close the session. So thank you very much for attending. We will send the information out to you, and the recording as well, if you want to pass it on to any of your colleagues. But yeah, thank you very much for attending, and I look forward to continuing to work with you all.